Hi Scott, welcome to iGaming Next and this session about how to successfully onboard people remotely. I'm super excited to be here with you today as we are representing two very different perspectives. Me being overall responsible for onboarding at Betsson in my role as Chief HR Officer, and you who recently joined Hero Gaming in April as CMO and was onboarded remotely yourself. So just to give some background information to today's discussions, as we are representing two different companies, Betsson has a total of 1,800 employees located in Malta, Stockholm, Budapest, Kiev, Peru, and now we're also setting up an office in Kenya. And in Malta, where we have our headquarters, I think we still are the biggest iGaming company with almost 1,100 employees. And Hero Gaming has a total of 130 employees, 8 in Malta, 14 in Malmö, and 10 remotely. So hopefully we'll give the audience some really good and interesting perspectives on how to onboard people remotely. So at Betsson, our strategy did not really change during COVID. On the contrary, we continued with our growth plans. And as Pontus Lindvall, our founder and CEO for Betsson AB, said that when there's a big storm, some companies are building shelters, and while other companies are building wind turbines. So during the past years, we have entered more than 7 new markets, and we have 7 more markets that we're going to announce shortly. And that has put some really high pressure on us to continue to hire and onboard the best talent. And looking at the statistics, this year we have onboarded on average 50 people per month. And I think we receive around 4,500 applications per month. And in July, we saw a spike and we started to receive around 6,000 unique applications, which is, of course, great. But we also see that it takes longer to hire people in this situation we are in. People probably think twice before resigning. They know what they have, but might be a bit conscious of being lost in, being on probation, perhaps having to relocate, etc. And I think it could be interesting to hear your story because you were hired and onboarded remotely in April during the lockdown period. You were still based in Estonia. Did you ever hesitate to join a new company because you had to start remotely? Was that even something you considered?
Thank you, Lena. Gosh, I just have to say, while I was listening to that, it occurred to me that you essentially onboard a Hero Gaming every 3 months, or you onboard more than a Hero Gaming every 3 months. So that's got to be an interesting challenge. So yeah, speaking personally for myself, I had never really considered one way or the other joining a company remotely. I think COVID caught me by surprise, like a lot of people. I was working outside of the industry in actually a language learning, global language learning company, app basically that we had grown from a meager, few thousand to millions of people. And we had remote offices. We had a London office, a Tallinn office in Estonia, and we had a bunch of remote workers, including senior level people, CTO in Spain and chief learning officer in Germany, et cetera. So I really didn't think it was going to be a problem at all, and I didn't really hesitate at all when I thought about joining Hero. It was really much more about the opportunity. But I have to say, I was caught a bit by surprise at how much more challenging it was. And it really gave me some perspective on what it's going to be like, or what it has been like for people to onboard remotely in this environment. I think there's a huge difference that we forget sometimes when we know our colleagues and then we're forced to be remote. But you already have developed relationships, you already know how they communicate, you can understand the nuances of those communications. You get into a situation where you're meeting, in my case, something like 30 new people in the first 2 weeks, and in a series of one-on-one meetings, and every meeting is challenging because you're meeting somebody new, and you're all you have to go on is this postcard size video screen, and I learned to appreciate just how much of communication between human beings lives outside of the verbal. It's nuances in facial expression and body language and things that put you at ease and make sure, confirm that exactly what you're communicating is landing for the other person in the way that you intend, that you're understanding and picking up the nuances of what they're saying and all that. So it was definitely something that I was absolutely didn't, went in completely confident and, naively confident about it first and didn't hesitate. But in retrospect, I think it's a big challenge.
I mean, I think due to the COVID situation, I guess most companies had to start onboarding remotely if they didn't already have that in place. And I think for us at Betsson, we didn't really change the content. We still have a 3-day onboarding program mandatory for all our new hires, regardless if they are a director or C agent or like you, Scott, on C level. So the way we structure our onboarding is that the first day is about the strategy, culture, values, getting to know senior management. All our C-level participate. And the second day is more about practical things, employee information and department presentations. And focus on the second day is more on how to collaborate and work together cross-functionally. And the third day is more about customer service, responsible gaming, going through some of the mandatory compliance training. So it's very, very comprehensive. And before COVID, we had a hybrid model. All new hires in Malta, for example, they met in a physical conference room. And then we had the other locations calling in online through Teams for the first day, and then local HR took over for the second and third day. And that was not the best option because it was quite difficult for presenters. I remember myself, you had the audience in the room, you tried to engage with them, and then you had the camera somewhere up close to the roof, and it didn't always work in an optimal way. And it's easier to address people in the room than people online, etc. But now with Corona, we were forced to do all our onboarding remotely. So we have all locations, all new hires connecting together, which in one way provides a much better One Betsson feeling, as everyone is welcomed and onboarded in the same way, and everyone participates in the same activities. And there's also an opportunity now to build global networks in a different way, which of course helps the One Betsson spirit. Scott, what's your view on this? Having people in a room, is that easier than talking to people over Skype or Teams, for example?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, first off, I think you're highlighting something that is really one of the key pieces, and one of my kind of takeaways on this is process is super important here. And I'm not, that's a big admission for me because I'm not much of a process guy in general. And I think sometimes the best processes are those that are essentially invisible because then they're running smoothly. But I can see, how that structured process, it's, even more needs to be more structured just by your sheer scale for Betsson works. Yeah. And I can see now, even as I've dug into this topic and reflected on it, how much there actually was, quite a process here. I would maybe describe it as a little bit more of a people first process, that where we do have meetings. They're not 3 days, which is really impressive that you do that and at the frequency. We have kind of a day long onboarding, and it happens roughly once a quarter because of the volume of onboarding of new employees. And that part was key. But by the time that happened for me in my cycle, I was largely onboarded from the people side. Some of the other things that you're saying, I think are, maybe this is not even just about onboarding, but just in general, how do you operate in COVID? We had the same discovery that when you have a mixed group where there's people in a room and people on a screen, it's far more challenging than either of the other options when you have everybody in a room or everybody remote. And I think that's, it's not an intuitive conclusion that people reach. And you have to reach that through experience and realizing what works and what doesn't. But I think it's just, it works much better for everybody if everybody's remote rather than, kind of, it's just a strange dynamic when you're reacting to a screen in a room. And I think, anyway, I think maybe that's probably the core points.
And you said you're not a process guy. At Betsson, as I said, to onboard 50 people per month, we have to be process oriented. We have to have a good structure in place because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this in a professional way. And I think the need for structure has been even more important now during COVID. And we have tried different kind of concepts, but what works best for us is to have 2 start dates per month. So every second week or every second Monday, we kick off this 3-day onboarding program, mandatory for all new hires. So everyone goes through the same One Betsson program. And this is also part of building our culture, and it's a great way for networking across the entire organization, as I said before. But this also means that no one can start in between these days. Obviously, sometimes there are exceptions, but we make sure that everyone has to. So when the recruiters hire people, they have 2 dates per month where they can sign on people on. And because we also want this to be very efficient for the new starters, but also for the rest of the organization. Because if we have 50 people per month, you can imagine how many questions, how much time from colleagues, from hiring managers is taking place just to help people with their onboarding or questions about IT or access, etc. So we try to do it in a very structured way.
And you're right. I mean, yeah, it's. I was wondering about that. It makes complete sense now. If you're doing it at that frequency, then you can actually have these hard start dates, and then the process starts exactly how it should. It is interesting. I mean, I think about the overhead, because you're right. Each of those sessions takes a lot of time from existing employees, right? So that's also interesting. But again, I think it probably speaks to your commitment to onboarding well. Yeah, it's very interesting. And then IT, I think, is actually a really critical one. I think I think sometimes overlooked. And I think that's also where this is the part of the process that exists here, but that's invisible, because IT was seamless for me, both when I was remote and literally had my own computer that now had to kind of onboard in a safe and secure way to our systems and processes. And then when I then came to Malta and then kind of went through that process again with the company machine but that level, like prioritizing that, I think is just so critical, because without that, people can't get to work. And I think it also really leaves an impression. It's part of the first impression of the company, right? Is how are they going to give me all the tools I need to be successful, and how kind of invested are they in that process? So yeah, it's a great call out.
Yeah. Another success factor for us now when we do all our onboarding remotely is to have a dedicated person. And that, I think, is linked back to us being a big company and having all these 50 people being onboarded every month. So we have Camilla in our case, who's responsible for onboarding, and she takes care of all the preparations. And we're lucky because Camilla is such a great ambassador, and she's so passionate about helping people get onboarded. And she's the type of person you really want to meet when you're new. So she becomes the face of Betsson before people start, during the whole onboarding process, but she also keeps in touch with them, checking in afterwards, sending out surveys, etc. And I think she develops very special relationships with the new hires, especially in these turbulent times. I think it's so important to have one person to go to, someone you can ask questions, even stupid questions, and that take away some of the pressure from hiring managers and colleagues as well. And I think people feel comfortable because she's there for them, and they can, reach out to her for anything, actually. I
think you're right. I mean, I think I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Key point of contact is really key, is critical. And there's probably something, because for me, that was Mari, our CPO, but I also felt, sometimes guilty taking up her time, to answer my mundane questions. But she never once kind of balked at that, which was, very gracious. But I also, to be honest, I've been now probing and talking to some of the other people who have onboarded with us recently, and kind of, digging into what their experience is. But it's a question I didn't ask them, was who did they perceive as their key point of contact? It's definitely, we've definitely had, I'm sure there is somebody, but it's got to be kind of nice to be at that scale where you have kind of one onboarding. One key.
And I think it's good because she coordinates with the recruiters, so they, she knows who's going to start.
Yeah. So it takes all the way through the process.
To have the IT equipment ready.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think, for me, that was key, right? They're the same people that were involved in my my recruitment and interview and hiring process were the same people I got to interact with on the outside.
And I think you mentioned a little bit, but one thing that is very important as well is how to build relationships during onboarding, especially remotely. How did you find that process? Was it easier, or was it more difficult to build relationships with your peers and colleagues?
Yeah, definitely more difficult. As I said, I mean, I think that just there's so much human beings, I think, are not, just not think about who we are biologically and from an evolutionary perspective, and we're not used to interacting through a screen, right? I mean, these are very, very recent inventions, and I think there's no substitute for being in person. And I know that can't always happen. I think there's two pieces to this. One is your manager. I realized when I reflected on this again, I would really describe our onboarding process as a very people first approach, because we don't have the regular kind of, you don't start with an introduction to the company that's formalized and structured. You really start from an introduction to the company by introducing it to its people, and it puts a heavier burden on each individual person, I think, to basically embody the company culture, right? So that all the interactions you have actually, reflect that. And maybe that's the advantage of the scale that we're at, is we still, are able to maintain that culture. But still, I think the other piece of it that's very, very key is your direct manager. I mean, I think in a less structured scenario, that's really key, because they've got to be the one who kind of guides you in this, or other kind of key peers or mentors who step up and take those roles on. And I think that was one thing that made it very easy for me is, you obviously need to have a good manager who's personable and embodies the culture, et cetera. But I think you also have to have somebody in this era who understands the differences from somebody onboarding in COVID, pre and post COVID, right? Somebody who's onboarding fully remotely, and somebody who you can go have a cup of coffee with and sit down with, and how it takes additional energy from that side as well, from the company side, to really say, okay, it's going to be twice as hard, 5 times as hard, whatever, for this new person to come on. I'm going to have to invest, half again or 5 times as much in that person to make sure that it works. So yeah, I think if you kind of pick these things apart, it's for me, it was a challenge, especially because, so given a people first strategy, you've got to meet with, I think I had, like I said, like something like 30 one-on-ones in the first 2 weeks. And that's great, because you do get to meet all the people who you're going to kind of touch and are going to be important for you. But it's also challenging because at a certain point, your brain can only kind of differentiate so much and absorb so much, right? And some of those meetings start to blur together. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is just, you kind of need that rock or a couple of rocks, which hopefully is your direct manager or some other people that step up that are willing to kind of really put that extra effort in to make sure that it's successful. Yeah. And I've turned around and I think, having seen how hard it was for me, that's the one advantage, is now when I'm onboarding people, I actually really take it very seriously, take that commitment very seriously, and have to, invest that time and energy.
And that's another area that you're addressing right now. That is, how do you build networks when we onboard remotely? Because, we have all our employees being onboarded remotely, and some of them might not even have been in office since they started. So I think when we are in the office, a big part of the onboarding experience is to make sure that people meet. We have the Friday beers, like most other companies. You have Halloween parties, football tournaments, social clubs, etc. So you cater to make sure that people can come together and meet up and find friends. I think 70% of all our employees in Malta are from outside of Malta. So they're coming alone, have no families, etc. So now it's even more difficult. We have relocated a lot of people to Malta, but we still offering people to work from home. The offices are open if they want to come there, but most people do work from home. So that puts some extra pressure on how do we make sure that people come together. So we have during the onboarding, for example, we have a couple of breakout sessions. We do a workshop around our company values. We have a quiz at the end of each day, so people have to pay attention. And a couple of weeks ago, we also invited all the new hires in smaller groups, because I think the limitation was 14 people back then. So we still try to have them to come together to get to know each other. Something that has worked very well is our social clubs. So we have better nights driving and managing different hobbies clubs. So we have the car club, we have the esport club, we have the arts and craft, etc. And that works very well also online. So people come together and meet up and outside of normal work hours. How do you view this too?
I love it. I mean, I think there's a number of things there. One is I really we kind of uncovered this when we were talking yesterday, but I think it's fabulous that even though you onboard remotely and you've figured out how to do that quite well, you do still encourage everybody to be in Malta, right? Or at least a large number of people, and I think that opens up that possibility. I think we've been more open post-COVID to remote hires. I think we had a very kind of office-centric approach, and we still obviously aim for that, but I think we have been open to people now who we know are never going to kind of be in the offices. But like you say, that giving that opportunity to get people together face-to-face is I think very, very important. And that's something that the most successful recent onboardings, I think, have been where people either are located in Malta, are relocating to Malta, or if they're going to be permanent remote, are willing to spend a couple weeks here in the early going and start to forge some of those casual relationships. Because that's really, like, as you say, these kind of, what you're doing through social clubs and things like that is really the bond, it's the glue. And it's something I think we still struggle with. I don't know how this is for you. I mean, it's great, at least you were, back where you could do 14 people, at least that's something. We're still struggling to do events, and I think they're great. We do, but to do online events in a fun way, and we're still, I think, exploring that territory. We've got a beer tasting where beers be delivered to everybody's houses, and various flavors, and we're going to kind of do that together. We're trying that tomorrow. We'll see how that goes.
That's a great suggestion.
I
might steal that one. No, but I think it's good if we could also learn from each other. How experience online, and how do we make sure that people are still engaged. We do this employee survey. We send out 3 to check in how people are doing, how it feels to work from home, if they have the support they needed. And we received really good feedback so far, and people still feel the best in spirit at home. But I think the longer this continues, the more innovation we have the more innovative we have to be around keeping the engagement level up.
Absolutely. And just your comment on surveys make me think it was one of the also aha moments for us. That this is again less about onboarding, but surveyed our employee base. A lot of changes, a lot of people working remote. A lot of people love that. Obviously, certain roles, would rather just work remotely forever. But the interesting thing that was surprising is we knew it would be a mixed batch, but actually where the center of the curve was everybody really liked the flexibility, right? Like, so it wasn't that people preferred the office or preferred remote, they actually preferred the option. And I think that was, I guess it doesn't seem that crazy when you think about it, but I think, the genie is kind of out of the bottle, right? For remote work now that COVID has but at the same time, people do still crave that human connection.
I don't see any questions from the audience, so I think we continue. I think we have 7 more minutes. Another part that we have seen as very important for successful onboarding remotely is to have the C-level engaged. As I said, in our first day, all C-level members are participating, and this is actually the first company that I work for where the C-level takes this so seriously. And I think that is also important when you're sitting remote to get to know the senior management, and it's a way to make sure everyone feels welcome, part of the Betsson family. We talk about our strategy. Talent people is our first pillar, so it's important also to show the new hires that we mean it. But I also think that it feels more. I think they feel more comfortable to ask questions and also participate in different discussions with C-level because they're online. They're not sitting in the classroom. What's your experience?
I think I couldn't agree more. I think, it's so, as our part of our kind of the formalized piece of it, all the C-levels do a presentation about their departments. And I think you're absolutely right. When you're in a Zoom room and everybody's video box is the same size and there's a chat available, so you don't have to actually unmute yourself. You can kind of raise a question by chat and things like that. I think it is far less confronting than if you're in a room and you realize that to ask a question, you've got to raise your hand in front of everybody. And, as a new employee, I think that's intimidating, but I think that is a benefit. There's a kind of if the C-level's willing to kind of participate and really get their hands dirty in that way, then it provides a different level of access, or a perception of a different level of access for new employees.
Yeah. So to summarize this session, I wish we had more time. This is super interesting to discuss with you and learn from you as well.
Likewise.
What do you consider being the 5 most successful factors for onboarding remotely?
So I was thinking about this and taking some notes on the call too, because there's some revelations here. But if I had to run down it in a way that maybe it's somewhat memorable, I would start with, and this is again speaking mostly from my experience. I'll weave in a little bit about what I've learned from you and from Betson. But I'm going to start with people first. So I think that if you don't have the scale to kind of do the start dates that you have, you have to, I think, start with people first. And this also then reinforces the importance of kind of driving your culture throughout the organization at a decentralized level, so that all the interactions that somebody gets really support their understanding of the corporate culture. So people first, IT second. I think that's absolutely critical. This is something that I got from doing a little bit of informal surveys and qualitative, research among recent onboarders, and just how important that first impression is, and how important it is to kind of feel like you can get to work and get to doing things. Yeah. Then this is the one I'm going to borrow from you. It was there, but I think it underscores his process is, having a process. And I joke really about not being, I am process oriented, but I pretend like I chafe at it. And I think that is really, really key, because there's so many pieces to this, especially in iGaming, like you say, just understanding, compliance and all of the pieces of it. And I think making sure that those don't fall through the cracks is really important, and process really helps that. And then I think the fourth one, so people, IT, process. The fourth one would be this in-person aspect. And I know this isn't always possible, but I think really working hard to find an opportunity for people to get together in person, whether that's, like you say, in very responsible groups in a country where everybody is, or trying to do travel where it's available, where it's possible in this era, and letting people kind of spend some time together, but getting back to that human element. And then the last one I would say is just is your manager, and if you're a manager and if you're onboarding people, just being willing to understand that you're going to have to put in, let's say 2.5 times more effort and more focus on that new employee. What are your thoughts? I'm curious.
I think you summarized it in a very, very good way, Scott. So I fully agree with you. I think structure, I think dedicated person, I think C-level engagement, I think the individual touch. So after the 3 days when the hiring manager is taking over, how to make that work, and also how to build networks, how to make sure that the new hires get to know your culture, even if they are working remotely. I think that is very important to keep the culture together. We have 1 more minute before our time is up, and we have received 1 question. Do you have any activities planned for Christmas in your company, Scott?
We do, and I think we are doing essentially a number of tables of 6 type of a dinner, or I forget if it's dinner or lunch, but we are going to try and get together in a responsible way. Again, you have to give people the opportunity to opt out of that, and that but we are gonna give that opportunity to people who are do it as carefully and as safely as we can, but give people that opportunity. How about yourself?
Yeah, we're also looking into that if we can do something depending on what's going to happen in Malta.
Yeah, of course.
But for the time being, it's smaller teams coming together. I know that in some of our locations, like in Tallinn, they're looking at doing things outside, come together, the distance. So we are still in planning mode. We are a little bit late this year, but we want to see what's possible and not.
I love that. I love that idea of coming together in Tallinn in December, because having lived there for 5 years, it's definitely a challenge. But the Estonians have an expression which I think is great. Maybe a fun note to close on, which is there's no bad weather, only bad clothes. Actually, I don't think it's just Estonian. It's probably all the Nordics kind of, and
all
Baltics
the Nordics
have this same expression, right? So yeah.
So with that, I just want to thank you, Scott. It's been super interesting to connect with you and hear about your background and how you work with this at Hero Gaming. So thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise, Lena. Thank you very much. This is really, really wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.